So today we're going to get into creating a neon effect in Adobe Photoshop. To prepare our file, we're going to go to Photoshop and go either new file or go file open new, whichever your preference is. When I click on new file, it brings up the pop-up in which we can pick out a default template. At the top navigation, I'm going to choose print and choose letter. Over on the left side, we have 8.5 by 11. All these settings can stay the same. Resolution 300. I'm going to keep it on color mode, RGB, to get some vibrant colors, and a white background. Once I have these settings, I can hit create. Now that we have our document created, we want to import the picture that we're going to be tracing over. To place our image, we're going to go up to File, the top navigation, down to Place Embedded. Clicking on Place Embedded, I can go into my downloads, choose out the file that I want to use, and click Place. So today we're going to be doing a Donald Duck transition into the neon lights. When I place the image, I want to scale this up so it fills out a little bit more of the space. I'm going to still leave room on the top and sides, but this will allow me to get higher quality image as preferred, just to be able to transition to a print or a poster, whatever I'm trying to do. So once I scale up the picture, I can hit enter, return, or click done on the bottom tab. Now we want to prepare our file and prep it so we can get into tracing over the lines. Over in the layers panel, I have the Donald Duck layer. I want to drop the opacity down to about 40%, just so I can still see the visual image, but when I trace over, adding in black lines, it's going to be a lot easier to see the difference between our lines versus the original. Once I have this, I'm going to lock the Donald Duck layer just to protect it, make sure I don't accidentally select it or move it in any way. I click this little white lock icon at the top of the layers panel. Now we want to get into preparing our brush. Over on the left side navigation, we're going to click on the pen tool. Right above the capital T of the type tool, clicking on the pen tool will give us the ability to set the thickness of our stroke. At the top navigation, we want to first make sure that we have the shape selected. If you have path, just click on the drop down and choose shape. Our fill, we're going to have no color. This little red diagonal line to the left side. Just click on the sample so we can see it. Next, we have our stroke panel. With our stroke, we want to make sure that we just have a black. If you don't see the black as the recently used colors, you can click on the color picker in the top right and choose from the color picker. I'm going to pull this down, and just for my own preference, I want to make sure it's 100 on the key. Even though we are into the RGB for this setting, just to get the most dark variation of black. Now that we have our stroke at black, we're going to adjust the weight of our stroke. Next to the stroke, we can see right now I currently have 4 pixels. I'm going to change this to 20 pixels. Looking at our settings, next to our 20 pixels, I can hit enter to place and make sure that it says 20 pixels here. We're going to look over and take a look at our line variations. Our caps and corners we're actually going to change to rounded. This will just make sure that we don't have any sharp edges that protrude off the image. But now we can get into tracing over top of the image. I'm going to start by zooming in. We're going to break this into 4 separate categories. The hat, the head, the bill, this yellow area, and then the tongue. Zooming in, getting a little bit closer. If it's too close, just hit Command or Control minus and you can zoom out. And we want to keep this as clean as possible using minimal amount of lines, but we want to try making smooth transitions from point to point. So take your time as you get into drawing. If you're new to the pen tool, it does take some time to get used to. But to begin with, I'm going to start above this eyebrow. I'm going to click a point and move over to the top part of this ribbon of the hat. I'm going to click and drag to create out a curve that matches to the shape. If it doesn't match perfectly, you could always add in a secondary point in the middle, but because of the thickness, it does match very well. Once I do draw out this curve, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option. Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC. We'll bring up this little arrow symbol down below my cursor. This recognizes that I'm going to cut off my handle, this blue line that extends, clicking on the last anchor point we just made. Now that I have that anchor cut off, I'm going to just draw a straight line that goes down, following the edge of this ribbon, and now we're going to go around the outside of the hat. I'm going to click and drag to create out a curve shape, falling in the middle of this area of the hat. It doesn't have to be the same weight or thickness of the current lines. For this neon effect, we want to maintain consistency of our stroke. I'm going to now continue over to the right side. If the curve doesn't necessarily match perfectly, I can always click and drag to pull it outward further. Or if I ever want to step back, I can always hit Command or Control Z to undo. So if I want to redo a point, I can click and drag again. Just drag it out till I'm satisfied with the curve that I have. Now I'm going to continue this line down to this little sharp corner on the top of the hat area. And I'm going to slightly bend it so it just matches to the shape of the rest of the hat. Once I do get to the end of this hat, I'm going to hit Escape or Enter. This will end my line so I can start a new fresh line. And where it intersects with the next line, I'm going to click a point. Try to match to the curve, the shape of the second part of the hat. And then I want to run this into the eyebrow that we originally started from. We're not going to connect it. We're going to use these lines as just a reference of where the hat is. So once I get to the end point, I can hit, again, Escape or Enter, cutting off that line so I can start a new line. The final element of the hat is getting this little ribbon. I'm going to click a point where it runs into the hat of the line that we already started. Click and drag, match that curve. Now, because our line goes the opposite direction, we're going to again hold down Alt or Option, cutting off the anchor so that we can draw out a new fresh curve. We're going to repeat this process, cutting off these anchors so that we can continually draw out new directions for our curved line. You can see that if I don't cut off the anchor, it ends up adding a curved element, continuing the curve from our last selection. So again, I can hit Command or Control Z to undo. This time I'm going to make sure to cut off the anchor point so that I can draw out a curve that matches to the shape. Once I've connected it back up to the top area, I can again hit Enter or Escape. And if I take a look at my layers right now, I have 3 layers, shape 1, 2, and 3. With these shapes, this represents our hat that we've created. I want to take these 3 shapes and put them into one single folder. Grouping them will allow me to be able to maintain consistency of the effects that we put on them. To select them out, you can either select on the top one, hold Shift, and click on the bottom one. Or I could always hold down Control or Command, depending on Mac or PC, and I can select individually on those individual layers. But I prefer to usually hold down Shift, click on the top one, hold Shift, and click on Shape 1. Now with them selected, I'm going to click on the folder icon at the bottom of the Layers panel, where it now renames it Group 1. And if I look under Group 1, I can see that I have Shape 1, 2, and 3 all within that single folder. I'm going to rename the Group 1 folder and call it Hat. And again, this will allow me to be able to focus on putting effects specifically on the hat and separate these from the other effects that we put on the rest of Donald. Now that we have the hat, we're going to focus on doing the head shape of Donald Duck. To start out, we're going to be taking a look at where the cheek runs into the image. So down where the bill and the cheek meet, I'm going to start out a fresh new line, click a point, click and drag to match that curve. We're going to get in the process of hitting enter or escape to cut off the line so we can start a new line. Click a new point, click and drag, and I can continue until it runs into the next line where it ends. Once I've run it into this eyebrow line, I can hit escape, start a new fresh line. It's going to run about midway to match the curve as best possible. And we can see that it does pretty well matching exactly to where the shape is. If you are unsatisfied with it, I can always step back, hold down Alt or Option, cut off the anchor point, and draw out my own curve. But again, hit escape. Now we're going to get into drawing out the hair strands on the top. I'm going to click a point where it runs into our eyebrow. Click and drag to match the curve. Just to zoom in so we can see it a little bit clearer, I'm again going to hold down Alt or Option, click and drag to make out my next curve. And you just continue to repeat this process. Hold down Alt or Option, click and drag. I'm just going to continue to follow along with the hair strands, going back and forth, cutting off the anchor so I can change the direction of our curves. And there's many different ways of doing this process, but I find that this is the most efficient and comes out very clean. Once I run over to this eyebrow, again, I can hit escape. Then I'm going to start a new one at the bottom of this eyebrow. Click and drag to match the curve. And I'm going to run down to where it runs into our eyeball of Donald. Once I run into the eye, again, I'm going to hit escape, ending the line. And now when we look to do the eyes for Donald, we're going to focus on just the top portions. I'm not going to do a connection on the bottom ends of where the eyes meet. The reason being is that the bill is going to end up sitting on top of our head. So we want to make sure that the yellow is going to be sitting on this bottom portion. So we're not going to do that aspect. Instead, what we're going to do is where the bill meets the eye, I'm going to click a point. And click and drag to match the curve as best possible. And I can bend the line to match the shape around, or do my best to replicate the shape as accurately as possible. If you need to redo or undo a certain line, again, you can always click on the anchor point and then bend out to the curve that you're looking for. I'm going to escape, starting a new line so I can get the pupil of the eye. Finally, running down to where it runs into the bill, I'm going to again hit escape so I can start a fresh line and get the other eye. So just take your time as you go through the process. If you ever mess up, you can always Control Z, undo. But we'll get the other pupil as part of the head. And look to finish it up. So all these lines that we just created, I now have up to shape 12. From shape 4 to shape 12 make up our head. So what I'm going to do, again, to select over in the layers panel, I have shape 12 selected. I'm going to scroll down to shape 4, hold down shift and click on shape 4. So I have all of them selected. And I'm going to click again on the new folder icon. Now I have, again, group 1. This time I'm going to rename it head. Our next piece is drawing out the tongue. The tongue is very simple. It's just this V shape inside his mouth. Again, with the pen tool, I'm going to click a point, click and drag to match the subtle curve. Again, hold down Alt or Option so that I can click and drag and match the shape of the tongue. When I run into that area, I can hit escape. And I'm simply going to rename shape 13 tongue. We don't need to make a folder specifically for it, because it is only one layer. Just be aware not to put it in another folder by accident. Finally, we have our bill that we need to trace out. And this is all the rest of the lines that we haven't traced yet over. I'm going to start over on the crease of his mouth, or his smile, clicking and point, click and drag, matching that curve. If you want to redo, just click and drag, match it until you're satisfied with the shape. Because there is no connection from this, I'm going to hit escape so I can start a new fresh line. And I might as well go in order trying to match to what I see. Down towards the bottom, I'm just going to trail along the top edge of his mouth and back over to the right side where I can hit again escape so that I can start a fresh new line. And it does take some time to get used to understand where to put the anchor points. But if you are dealing with the same type of image, you can use my images and my anchor points as references. Now that I've run into this area, I can hit escape and continue to draw out new fresh lines for our Donald Duck. So as I get over to the right side of the cheek, I'm going to look to now draw out the outside edge of our entire rest of the bill. I'm going to click and drag to match this curve. Hold down Alt or Option, cutting off the anchor, so that I can draw out the top line that's going to run across the entire face. Try to make sure that I follow along with the shape. I want to click and drag to bend the lines to the curves as accurately as possible. If I need to step back, I can always hit Control or Command Z and redo a line as needed. I'm going to cut off this anchor point just so we can see that at any point, if you're unsure about where the curve is going to end up, you can always restart and redraw it to your preference. And I've done this hundreds of times, but it's always interesting that you come up with different anchor points all the time. Just take your time to make it as accurate as possible, smooth lines that aren't going to show any weird distortions. I'm going to hit escape to end that line and look to do the final line inside the edge of the mouth. And finally, running it into one of the original lines of the bill. Now that I have these lines drawn out, again, we want to look to put these into one single folder. So from shape 19, I'm going to scroll down, selecting down to shape 13. With these, I'm going to click on the folder icon to group them and rename this layer Bill. So we have our image traced out. Now we want to get into creating the neon effect. To create the neon effect in the most efficient way possible, we are going to have to get into changing out the colors of the strokes that we made black. It was just a lot easier to trace over the outline of the original shape. But to begin, we're going to select on our background layer, and you're going to hit Command or Control I. This will invert our background, turning it to black. Then we're going to open up the folder for our hat layer, or our hat group. We have shape 1, 2, and 3. Again, like we selected the original layers, we're going to hold down Shift to select out and choose out all 3 layers. Then over in the left side navigation, we're going to go back to our pen tool. With our pen tool, when I click on the pen tool, you're going to see that it will highlight over the lines that we currently have selected. So they're currently highlighted over on the right side. We see that they're highlighted blue on my screen. They may be highlighted white on yours. But what we're going to do is, at the top navigation, change our stroke from black to white. When I simply click on one of the white recently used colors, we see that it applies around the edge of the hat. We're going to look to consolidate the hat and now go to the head Again, selecting on the top layer, I'm going to hold down Shift, select on shape 4, and now again change out the stroke from white to black, or from black to white. Our tongue layer, we can consolidate the head. With our tongue, we're going to again change our black stroke to white. And finally, our bill, selecting on the highest layer, scroll down to the bottom, hold Shift, and select on shape 13. And you, again, may have many more layers or many more shapes than I do. It's all a matter of just getting comfortable with the pen tool, and you can find ways of consolidating the amount of strokes that you use. But again, I'm going to look to change our stroke from black to white. And once we do set our strokes to white, we no longer need our original Donald Duck image. Just understand that the colors that make up Donald Duck are a blue for the hat, a orangish yellow for the bill, a pink or red for the tongue, and then the head itself is majority white. And we'll talk about how we can get into modifying our settings, but we can hide our original Donald Duck image and get into turning this into a neon effect. So I'm going to again consolidate the bill layer folder with the hat folder selected. Rather than going into the layers, we're going to apply the effects on all strokes that are inside of the group folder. To do this, we can either double click on the hat layer or go down to FX at the bottom of the layers panel and choose blending options. So if I double click, it pulls up our layer style panel. For our settings, we're going to start by adding in 3 different effects. We have our inner glow, our outer glow, and our drop shadow. These are going to be the 3 essential ones that we use for our design. I'm going to start with the inner glow. And just to zoom in, see the difference of what happens when we do this effect. In our blend settings, with the inner glow selected, we're going to first start out making sure that our blend mode is normal. Our opacity is going to be set to 85%. The color currently is set to white. Again, we saw that the hat was blue, so I want to make this a blue color. I want to get the most vibrant blue I possibly can, so I'm going to pick out a lighter bright blue. And what I want to do is make sure that when I do pick out the color that I have, I'm going to highlight the hex number, the 6-digit combination of letters and numbers that make up this specific color. I'm going to highlight over the 6-digit number and hit Command or Control C, copying that hex number, and I can click OK. And we see that it does apply onto the hat, but it's a little bit too strong right now. What I'm going to do is modify some of our settings in the element section of our inner glow. We want to make sure that the source is edge. Our choke is going to be set at 0, and my size is going to be relatively between 13 to 18. What this does is create the sense of a cylindrical effect on the white lines. Gives it more of a tube shape. Down at the bottom where the quality is, I want to make sure that my range is set to 50%. Jitter can stay at 0. Just to show the difference, if I do adjust the size up to 18, it gets a little bit thicker, but the ideal type of effect is maintaining a little bit of white on the inside to show that tubing effect. So if I decided to go in the middle, 15 is good. But now that I have my inner glow set, we're going to add in an outer glow. Clicking on the outer glow, I do have some settings already done for me, but we want to go through them. I'm going to make sure that I have blend mode normal, opacity again 85%. I'm going to click on the color sample to the left side here and hit Command or Control V as a Victor to paste in the blue color that we pasted earlier. And click OK. In my spread settings, I'm going to keep my spread at 0, but adjust my size of my stroke to down to 55. You can always type in the number, and this gives a little bit stronger blue, not overdoing it. We can again maintain our contour, range, and jitter at 50% and 0. The last one that we're going to add today is our drop shadow. With our drop shadow is going to be used to actually create out a light source. Instead of being just a black drop shadow sitting underneath of it, we're going to change this color again to the blue that we previously used. This just helps to make a more vibrant variation of this blue color. I can paste in the hex number, hit OK. Settings wise, I'm going to drop my opacity to about 70%. The distance is going to be set at 0. My spread is going to be relatively about 20%. And my size is going to be pushed up to about 120. You can see that as soon as I do that, it adds a lot more vibrance to the color, make it really stand out like it's glowing. The contour is going to stay on the normal first option, and our noise can stay at 0. But now that I have these settings can be applied onto all the other effects. They maintain the same thickness with the stroke, so it's going to be easy to apply for these effects. And understand the stroke thickness will vary, and those effects will change based on the stroke thickness. Right now I have a stroke of 20 pixels. If you use a thinner stroke, you may want to modify or adjust the settings so that it represents or matches the stroke thickness a lot better. So again, once I have these settings, I can click OK. I can zoom out. We see how well that blue does really pop out on the screen. So these effects that we've just placed on the hat, we can actually look to copy over to other settings. We just have to adjust the color as we go. I'm going to skip the head for a moment and look to apply these hat effects onto our tongue first. To copy these layer style effects, I'm going to right click on the hat group folder and hit copy layer style. Hitting copy layer style allows me to copy the inner glow, outer glow, and drop shadow. I'm going to click on the tongue layer, right click, and paste layer style. It is going to make my tongue blue, but we want to change this now to more of a red or pinkish color. Once I've pasted the effects on, I can double click either on the inner glow or right on the tongue itself. It brings up our layer style, in which I can go back over to my inner glow. I'm going to click on the blue sample, adjust my color up to a red, and I can copy this hex number, Command or Control C. If I wanted to pick out a different variation or different color, I can as well. But it's just a matter of making sure that we copy the hex number so it maintains, and we'll transition to the other settings. Once I've gotten the inner glow hex number, I can choose on my outer glow, change this blue, Command or Control V. We see that these effects are being applied onto our tongue, and the final one adding to the drop shadow, paste it in, and now we have that red really glowing on our tongue. Once I'm satisfied, I can click OK. And the reason why we broke it down, starting with the hat of drawing this out, we want to make sure that certain layers aren't stacked on top of each other. If I have the hat on top of the head, these blue lines are going to interfere with Donald Duck's face. So just be careful to make sure that we organize our layers. The bill should be on top, the tongue below that, and the head is going to be on top of the hat. I'm going to choose the bill layer, right click and paste the layer style. We can see again it is blue because we pasted the original layer styles from the hat. But again, we're going to click on the inner glow, change this to a yellow-orange color. I can highlight the hex number, Command or Control C, and paste them into the outer glow and drop shadow as well. So it's very easy to change all these settings very quickly, just a matter of picking out the colors that work for you. And you don't have to always stay to the standard colors. If you want to pick something more vibrant, you absolutely can. See how creative you can get. The final aspect that we're going to be looking at is pasting the same settings onto the head, but the head is going to be slightly different because we're trying to do a white. And I'll explain the difference in a second, but I'm going to right click on the head layer, paste layer style. I'm going to zoom in just so we can see the difference as we do the final step. For a head layer, I'm going to double click to go into layer style. I'm actually going to go down to the drop shadow first and change this to a white, and change our outer glow to white as well. The reason why I did these first is that our inner glow is going to be slightly different from everything else. If I make our color just a pure white, it ends up making everything too flat. It eliminates that tube or cylindrical effect that we're going for on these lines. So what we're going to do is actually make this white a light gray. Doesn't have to be any specific light gray, but the idea is that we're creating the sense of a tubing around those lines, those strokes. So you can see the difference as I create this tube. It gives it more dimension. And that's what we're trying to go for whatever color you're applying to. We don't want it to just be a flat color. Again, the white, it just comes out too flat. There is no separation or variation on the thickness. So putting it into light gray creates that sense of dimension on those shapes. So once I'm satisfied with the coloring, I can click OK. I can click OK on my layer style. And when I zoom out, we have our neon effect of Donald Duck. So just a reminder, having your layers organized is important. If I have my bill on top of or behind my tongue, you see how the tongue is sitting on top of the bill elements. It ends up distracting and taking away from the mouth. So I'm going to make sure that my bill is on top of the tongue. Again, the same idea. If the head was on top of my bill, clicking and dragging just so we can see it, these white sharp lines take away from our bill shape. They become more of a distraction that they don't blend in well. But when the head is below the bill, it makes sure to hide those end lines and allow us to see the glow effect as we were hoping. So once we've created out this effect, we're going to simply look to save this as a Photoshop file. We can go File, down to Save, change it, save it as a Photoshop file, and then go to File, Save a Copy to save it as a JPEG. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. It's an update from years past and just a little bit more efficient process from beginning to end.